Hello, and thank you for joining me. This is the flip video lesson for 5.01, Portugal and Spain and the Age of Exploration. It goes along with your Human Odyssey reading pages 196 to 209 and your student guide pages 124 to 128. Lesson Introduction. Asia had much to offer and Europeans knew it. But how could the Europeans get the spices, silk, porcelain, and all the other riches? The Ottomans controlled the ancient Silk Road, and it was terribly dangerous to travel through mountains and deserts. But eager European monarchs wondered if ships could sail to Asia and back. New ship design and navigation aids might make such trips possible. The race to find a route was on. As the kings and queens vied for fame and riches, the explorers had no idea that they would find whole worlds unknown to them. At the same time, the people of the powerful empires across the seas knew nothing of Europe or Asia or Africa. They had no idea what was about to happen. Once Asian goods arrived in Europe after the 13th century Crusades, life was never the same again. Europeans had been buying silks and gems since the days of the Roman Empire, but now they also wanted spices. Just think of the delightful aroma of cinnamon and nutmeg. Think of the tang of pepper or cloves. Spices could also be used to make medicines. But perhaps most important of all, since refrigeration hadn't been invented, spices could be used to help preserve food. Business between Europe and Asia boomed until the Ottoman Turks gained control of the land routes between Europe and Asia. Then travel grew dangerous. What could Europeans do? Were there other ways to reach the East? Lesson objectives. Describe the reasons for European interest in traveling by sea to Asia in the 15th century. Explain that Columbus called the people he met Indians because he thought he had reached the Indies of East Asia. Identify Columbus as the Italian navigator who first sailed west to get to Asia, and Ferdinand and Isabel of Spain as his sponsors. Identify Diaz as the Portuguese explorer who first rounded the southern tip of Africa. Identify Prince Henry the Navigator as the Portuguese patron of sea expeditions. Identify two improvements in navigation and explain that they allowed sailors to travel farther from land. Locate Portugal, Spain, the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Cape of Good Hope on a map, and trace a map on the route of Columbus's first voyage, and identify San Salvador as his landing point. Here's a little map for your student guide on page 124. Please make sure you do start filling in the answers on this student guide. So the time was the 15th century, which is also the 1400s. Remember, there's that little lap of 100 years. And if you have questions about that, please make sure that you look into that. And then the place is Portugal, Spain, Atlantic Ocean, and the Mediterranean Sea. And if you take a look on your Human Odyssey book, pages 198 and 199, you'll see this map of the Age of Exploration. The goal. Why were Europeans eagerly searching for a sea route to Asia in the 15th century? There was a huge demand for goods that could only be obtained in Asia, such as silk, spices, pearls, and other gems. The Ottoman Turks controlled the Silk Road, which was the main land route from Europe through the Middle East to Asia. The Turks attacked Europeans who attempted to use the route. Other land routes were extremely difficult and hazardous. Mountains, deserts, bad weather, and bandits made overland travel too dangerous for Europeans. The man. Who played a key role in helping to find a sea route to Asia? In the early 1400s, Prince Henry, a son of the King of Portugal, played a key role in helping to find a sea route to Asia. His curiosity and passion for adventure and the sea led him to establish a court in Sagres at the southern tip of Portugal. From there, he set out more than 50 expeditions to explore Africa. The Portuguese learned a lot about Africa and sailing on the open sea from the expeditions. Prince Henry also worked with shipbuilders to adapt small sailing ships called caravels. These lightweight ships kept pushing south, hoping someday to find Africa's southern tip. The tools. Improvements in seafaring equipment that helped the explorers achieve their goal. The caravel. The Portuguese adapted a small sailing ship that rode high on the water. Its small hull and lightness allowed the caravel to sail close to unfamiliar coasts. Its triangular-shaped sails could catch the slightest wind, and the ship was relatively easy to control in rough waters. The astrolabe. They fine-tuned the navigational instrument used to determine latitude. Quadrant. The Portuguese also used quadrant, a small quarter circle fitted with a plumb line and marked with degrees. It could determine latitude more accurately than an astrolabe. Bartolomeu Diaz. Bartolomeu Diaz was the first European around the southern tip of Africa. He named it Cape of Storms, but King John later named it Cape of Good Hope. Why did King John rename the cape as he did? King John renamed the cape because it gave him hope that Portuguese ships would finally find their way to Asia, because they had proved that they could go around the southern tip of Africa. In Europe's quest for a sea route to Asia, what was the significance of Diaz's accomplishment? He proved that ships could sail south around the southern tip of Africa and then eastward towards Asia. And if you take a look at that map there, it shows a good picture of that exploration. Christopher Columbus. Unlike the Portuguese, who had rounded Africa and were sailing east towards Asia, Christopher decided to sail west. His decision was based on his estimates of the Earth's circumference and the sizes of Asia and Europe. Unfortunately, Columbus underestimated the former and overestimated the latter. Although this resulted in a much longer voyage than he anticipated, his estimates probably helped convince Ferdinand and Isabella, the two Spanish monarchs who sponsored his voyage. Why did Columbus call the people he met during his first voyage Indians? He thought he had reached the Indies, the large and varied group of lands that included India, China, Japan, Southeast Asia, and the islands of Indonesia. And just a quick note, remember that the maps that they used during that time were maps that they were making as they were going. So the maps did not look as our maps do today. Nautical showing the route Columbus took from Spain to San Salvador, where he first made landfall. And you can use your student guide pages 126 to fill in this map. How did the Americans get their name? Why are they often referred to as the New World? The Americans were named in honor of Amerigo Vespucci. Around 1502, Vespucci wrote a widely circulated letter in which he referred to the recent discoveries as a new world. Why were Europeans looking for sea routes to Asia in the 15th century? By the 15th century, demand in Europe for Asian goods, such as silk, spices, and precious gems, had grown considerably. Traveling overland from Europe to Asia was extremely difficult and hazardous. In addition, the Ottoman Turks controlled the Silk Road, which was the main land route from Europe through Middle East to Asia. These factors led Europeans to seek a sea route to Asia. Portuguese prince and patron of sea expeditions who played a key role in the search for sea routes to Asia was Prince Henry. He was also known, aka, as Prince Henry the Navigator. Improvements in navigation and seafaring that allowed sailors to go farther from land in their search for sea routes to Asia, that was the development of the caravel, and improvements to the astrolabe and the quadrant. The first European to round the southern tip of Africa was Bartolomeu Diaz. Explanation of why Columbus thought the quickest way to reach Asia was by sailing west, and why he was wrong. According to Columbus's calculations, the shortest sea route to Asia from Spain was a westerly route. His calculations were based on estimates of the circumference of the Earth and the size of Europe and Asia that were incorrect. The works he had relied on made him underestimate the Earth's circumference and overestimate the size of Europe and Asia. And remember, the circumference is the area around the Earth. The Spanish monarchs who sponsored Columbus's voyage in 1492 were Ferdinand and Isabella. Why did Columbus call the people he met during his first voyage Indians? Columbus called them Indians because he thought he had reached the lands in Asia that Europeans called Indies. I'm sorry, there's a typo there. Fix that really quickly. There we go. The map on page 112. Spain, Portugal, the Mediterranean Sea, the Atlantic Ocean, the Cape of Good Hope, and San Salvador. Please make sure you do fill in these areas on your map on page 112. And there we come to the end. Not all those who wander are lost. Thank you for joining me today.